Hi there, it's Tracy Kiernan from stepbysteppainting.net, and this is a landscape painting tutorial. We are going to be painting Lake Tahoe with acrylics on an 11 by 14 inch canvas. Lots of details in this one, and I'm going to first go over colors and brushes. 9 colors for this painting. So we have Phthalo Green, Turquoise Blue, Cerulean Blue, Bright Aqua Green, Cadmium Yellow, Medium Hue, Burnt Sienna, Dioxazine Purple, Mars Black, and Titanium White. As far as the brushes, you'll need a 3/4 inch flat wash brush, a 12 bright brush, number 4 round, and 3/8 inch angle brush. You'll need a paper plate palette or whatever you use as a palette, a jar for water protected workspace, and I'm doing this on an 11 by 14 inch canvas. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And with these landscape paintings, I like to mark my horizon line first. And this design has the horizon line right in the center of the canvas. So since this is 14 inch high, I'm making marks at 7 inches with my pencil and a ruler. And I'm going to place a piece of painter's tape right below those marks. You want to place that tape, the top line of that tape below that 7 inch mark, because we will be painting the sky first. So setting that tape down, making sure that's in the center, and the top and bottom of that tape is parallel to the top and bottom of the canvas. Let's load our palette with Titanium White and Cerulean Blue. So these are the 2 colors in the sky, and we will be using a 3/4 inch flat wash brush. Load that into the water and kind of tap it dry on the side. You still want a little bit of water on that brush, but not too much. And let's distribute that into the Cerulean Blue. And let's start at the top, left and right strokes all the way across the canvas. And you want to go down 1 or 2 inches with that blue. Then, without rinsing the brush, grab white on the tip of the brush, start below your blue, and you want to blend it up into the blue so that your blue becomes a little bit dark at top and it starts blending to a lighter blue. And then you want to work that transition zone, so where that darker blue meets that lighter blue, you want to stroke over that with your brush multiple times to get that color to blend. And then we're just going to continue down to the horizon line with this blue and white combination. We want to ideally get our sky to be slightly darker at the very top of the sky and then much, much lighter on the bottom. But it's not going to be a pure white on the bottom. It's going to be a very, very light blue. And you can see that I have streaks in the sky, and it's not blending like a perfect gradient, and that's okay. We don't need it to be a perfect gradient blend. It can have some color variation just so that it does look a little dark at top and a little bit lighter at the bottom. So as I'm continuing to paint down all left and right strokes, I'm only grabbing the titanium white on my brush. So we went all the way down to that tape line, and we're going to stop. You don't need to wait for this paint to dry before lifting the painter's tape. You can gently lift it up, and hopefully none of it has seeped down below it, but if it did, that's okay because we can always paint over those parts. So we have a nice clean horizon line, and we are going to start our water next. So with the water, we want titanium white and turquoise blue, and we want to completely rinse off that 3/4 flat brush. So kind of the same thing, rinse it off, tap it dry. Let's start with just the white on our brush, just the white on the tip of the brush, and let's start just below that horizon line. So we want to capture this kind of really bright light glow in the water that's way in the distance just under the mountains. So we're going to do that by making sure that this part is bright white. We're going to go down maybe an inch and then grab a very small amount of turquoise onto the corner of your brush. So just like a dot of paint, and blend that up into your white area, but still leave a slither of bright white showing with no turquoise blended into it. Then you want to go ahead and grab a big chunk of turquoise, and let's start below that really pretty light blue color. And this is going to be pretty dark. This turquoise is a strong color, so start below it, big chunk of turquoise below it, and then when you get to that transition zone where those two colors meet, paint over that several times, but be very gentle. We still want the part of the lake that's just under that horizon line to be very, very light, a really bright white glow, and so you don't want to blend that too far up. So just be very careful with this area. Make sure there's not a lot of turquoise on your brush right there. If you need to add more white in there, you are welcome to. We're going to introduce the bright aqua green color into our water, and this is going to add another sort of really pretty aqua tone into the water. Go ahead and wipe the brush off. You don't necessarily have to rinse it all up, but wiping it off is fine. And let's go back over some of this turquoise and let's add the aqua green, but we don't need to blend it all the way. So there's like these streaks of this aqua green color. You can even add a little white into the aqua green, especially up here in this brighter area. And then we can take this aqua green and we can go down here. And if this isn't blending because it's dry, that's fine. We can always add a little bit of turquoise and help that to blend. It's a very similar color. It's just a lot lighter, more greener. And we have this like lighter area, and there's like a darker area in the middle. And then for the rest of the way down to the bottom of the canvas, let's just do the turquoise because the bottom of the lake is going to be darker than the very, very top of the lake. So we'll need some more turquoise on the palette. I'm just going to take the rest of this turquoise and I'm going to continue down to the bottom of the canvas. I'm trying to get that to blend with our aqua. So we have that all filled up. I'm going to rinse the brush again and go in and add some more of that aqua, bright aqua green. So this is the aqua. I'm going to blend that over here with that turquoise. I'm going to grab some white and aqua, and back here I really want to add more of that lighter glowing color. So that's just a lot of white and a little bit of aqua, and I'm just bringing that down a little bit further. Taking a little bit of that white and aqua up here in the back part, blending it in. Then I'm going to add more white to my palette. Mix just a teeny bit of aqua into that and using not the full width, just the tip. Just bringing this down a little bit further. It's a little bit of the darker streaks from that darker color kind of showing through that. Bringing that down, but not trying to bring it down too far. And we don't need to wait for this to dry for this next step, but we are going to move on to the mountains. And I used Dioxazine Purple to create these purple mountains. You'll also need titanium white and a little bit of Mars black because we're not going to be using pure purple. We're going to make kind of a gray purple out of this. I'm going to take my 3/4 wash out of the water and set it to the side and grab my 3/8 inch angle brush. If you don't have an angle brush, you don't even have to have one this size. It could be like a 1/4 inch angle brush. You can also use a flat brush for this or a round brush. I'm going to go ahead and mark the top highest peak, and that's going to be 2 inches from the horizon line. So I made a little mark, and that's kind of a visual so I know that my mountains cannot go higher than that point. So I'm going to start at the left, and this is just pure Dioxazine Purple, by the way. I didn't blend it with anything yet. I'm going to define my mountain range. There's going to be a variety of peaks and valleys, but the bottom parts of this line, I'm not touching the horizon line, so it stays above the horizon line. So 3 peaks, and the 2 on the left are relatively the same size, so about 2 inches high. So you can kind of change yours if you want. You just defined the mountain range, and we're going to go ahead and make our gray purple color. So adding some black to the palette and the white. So you need about 2 parts white, 1 part black, and maybe 1 or 2 parts purple. It just should be like a really kind of light sort of gray purple color. And we can always adjust this to make it darker if it's too light. Let's go ahead and start with this color that we have. And I'm not worried about like snow or shading or anything right now. I'm just going to start by filling in our mountain colors. I'm going to add a little bit more purple, black, white to this. So I have a lot of paint to work with. And I'm starting at the peak, so the top of each of the mountains. I'm just kind of dragging my paint color kind of slowly down using kind of short strokes. I'm not going to go all the way to the horizon line. There's going to be another layer of mountain there, so I don't need to paint all the way down. So paint almost all the way down, maybe leave like a 1/4 inch of space of a gap. Just little short strokes. And I'm dragging those strokes down, kind of contour with the shape of the mountain, but leaving a gap above your horizon line. So you want to fill your entire mountain range. So I have that all filled up with solid of that light purple gray color. And then I'm going to grab some white on my brush without rinsing the brush. I'm going to start doing some of the snowy sort of highlighty thing to the mountain. And we're going to do this on the right side of each of the mountains. And this angle brush is nice because I can kind of turn it to get different angles with this. But I'm just going to take the white, and it's blending on the canvas since that purple's still wet. Just going to add that lighter color on the right side of each of these peaks. It's like a little kind of diagonal sort of space over there on the right, and that is your short little strokes, kind of still sort of dragging down, blending with that purple, but leaving that left side of the mountain darker. I'm going to do it right here on the right side, little short kind of strokes, kind of dragging down, and right here as well, short strokes dragging downwards. You can take this, just kind of extend this over here to the right. And I like to add a little bit of white to our shadowy part to give that some texture, but not the same amount of brightness as the right. So I'm just doing these little diagonal strokes that are kind of going downwards, swooping downwards. And that is going to kind of create some texture on that part, but it's also not as bright as the right side. And then right here, I grabbed some pure Dioxazine Purple, so you can see how much darker that is compared to the lighter part of the mountain. But I'm going to create a new mountain range, and this one is lower and in front of the lighter color, taller mountain range. So I didn't draw this one out first. I'm just going to kind of create it as I paint along here. But we have some higher peaks and some lower ones. Generally, it's a lot more flatter than the first one. It's darker because it's closer. And we're just filling that in with our Dioxazine Purple. There might still be some lighter colors on my brush, and that's okay. And it might be blending a little bit with the lighter color behind it, and that's also okay. It doesn't have to be pure Dioxazine Purple. Just added a few kind of shadow lines here. Sometimes if I'm working on one thing, I'll jump back and go back to something else. That's what I did there. And then I'll finish filling this in. So I also didn't go all the way to the bottom with that. If you went to the bottom, that's fine. There's a third mountain range. It's going to be kind of more green, and we're going to put that in front of that darker one. So with the white, I'm going to kind of do the same thing here, but try not to make it blend in too much with the mountain behind it because it's the exact same color. So I'm going to try not to add too much white here, but I'm going to do kind of the same technique on the right side of each of these mountains. I'm just doing short little strokes, dragging diagonally down to the right. Right here as well, short strokes, kind of dragging diagonally down. But leaving the left part of those mountains darker. We are going to add our green layer to our mountain next. I'm just kind of wiping the rest of that color off on my palette there. But I'm not going to rinse it off because I'm going to allow some of that purple to mix with my green, but not too much. That's why I wiped it off. And I'm grabbing the Phthalo Green. So this is Phthalo Green. I'm going to start. So this part is right up along that horizon line. So the bottom of this sort of flat mountainy area is flat. It touches the edge of the lake, but it does have a few peaks, but they're a lot shorter than the other mountains. So sort of kind of low-lying hilly area. And just doing short little strokes to form that. So I'm done with that green, and I'm going to rinse the brush off. So if you want your mountains to look like they're a little bit more snow-capped, we can go back in with just the white, still using the angle brush. And right there, I'm just going to drag some of this pure white, mostly on the tip and on the side, and it's just dragging down and just sort of disappearing. Again, short strokes, dragging down just on the right side of the mountain peaks. So that brightened up that. I can add a little bit over here on the left as well, but not as much as we did on the right. So the left part should still be darker. The next element we are going to add to our landscape painting are the rocks. And these rocks were done with in layers, starting with pure black as our first layer. And I will be using a number 4 round brush. So the first thing for painting these rocks is just simply defining where these rocks are and painting them solid black first. So with your number 4 round brush and your black, and just kind of this area down here in the lower right has a lot of rocks, a lot of different layers of rocks. But right now let's just kind of define that area. So I'm painting kind of the shape of the rock first, and then filling that in solid. It only goes to about the halfway, so the middle part of the lake. Those rocks end like right there, and then they kind of build up higher. It's kind of tricky because we don't see where the rocks are because we haven't done the highlighting yet, so we're just kind of guessing what that shape, the silhouette shape of that rock area would be. So we have a bumpy, silhouetted, rocky area, and we're not gonna fill this in with highlights just yet. We're gonna go ahead and define the rest of the rocks. And so Mars Black and round brush, loaded some more Mars Black onto my palette. With this black, sometimes it helps to add a little bit of water into that, helps it to be kind of flowy. So right here we have another sort of rocky land area. These are where our 2 trees are going to be growing out of, by the way. And this one is about 1.5 inches from the bottom of the canvas. So we defined that rock shape of a larger rock. And then we have some other kind of rocks that are not attached to any sort of land area. They're just in the water. So we have smaller, larger. You can create a variety of sizes. You can change the placement of these rocks too. This one's a little bit kind of taller, kind of pointed. Another small one. I'll do kind of a smaller rock. Extend this one down just a little bit, and I'm going to do one more rock over here, lower left. So we're going to add the highlights to these rocks next, and we don't need to wait for the black silhouette to dry. Wipe your brush off. So I just wiped my brush off on the palette and grabbed some white. Let's make kind of a medium to light gray color, about 3 parts white, 1 part black on your palette, the medium gray color. And on the left side of your rocks, we're just going to do these short, sort of rounded strokes. We're going to start just on the edge of that rock. So that's the lightest, brightest part of that rock. And then as you paint kind of towards the middle, you want to do kind of lighter strokes with a lot of that black showing through. So just kind of lightly sort of outline the left part of the rock, and then you do lighter strokes. So right here, this one's blending because that black is still wet, and that's okay. You outline the left side. outline the left side and then smaller strokes going towards the center, kind of like barely dragging it and just letting it sort of like fade away. Outline the left and then start dragging that inwards. So this rock right here, I decided that one is going to be kind of in front, so I took that outline and dragged it down and had it overlap some of those other rocks. So it just kind of fades away into the black. If you want, you can even use your finger to help smear that, kind of blend that away. What we're trying to achieve is the left side of that rock, the outline bright, and we want it to fade away to that darker color quickly. We could go in and add more rocks now if we want. This one, I wanted to add another kind of rock back here. Knowing that there's going to be a tree right here, I want to kind of make sure there's going to be a flat area. So right here where I'm painting this sort of flat rock, that's where that pine tree is going to be coming out of. I don't think it's actually growing out of the rock. There's probably some kind of land right here as well. And so this one we'll do like another kind of rock behind there. And then we can do that little highlight thing. So do your white. You can use your finger to smear that. So that's kind of how that works. Do the white. You could use your finger or your brush, drag that in to the rest of the rock. So you're leaving a lot of that black shadowy part on the right still showing. And that's how it creates those sort of layers, because the rocks next to it have the brightness and the darkness. And then we can do maybe another little darker guy down here. And then lights. And it goes into dark. So we're going to repeat that process for all of these rocks. So this guy right here has the lightness on the left side and the darkness. So all of the light parts do not have to be the same. They can vary. So this gray right here can be darker than some of the other grays in the other rock. And we'll do the highlight on this one. So this one I actually did it more on the right in the top. And then use my finger to spread that the rest of it out. Same with right here. Short sort of like abstract strokes. We're not trying to go for hyperrealism or anything here. Can go back, add brighter white to some of this. So we had kind of a gray layer, but we can go in and add white just to the very edge, and that's going to brighten up some of that. And then going back in with some darks, and doing like these sort of choppy stippled strokes in there. And then this one too has to have like a flat area because we have a tree somehow growing over here. So I'm just going to create this sort of flat rocky piece behind this rock. So starting with the black. And then you can wipe that off and grab a little bit of white And do the sort of highlighting on the edge, the top edge. Little choppy strokes kind of go down. Wanted this rock to be just a little darker than that one in front of it. The next thing I'm going to do is create some reflection in the water from the rocks so it doesn't look like these rocks are just floating on the water without any sort of reflection. So let's use the 12 bright brush, load that into the black, but wipe it off with the paper towel so that there's only a little bit of paint left right there on the tip of the brush. You're going to drag using the full width of the brush just under that rock. You're just going to drag it down until it sort of disappears. So you're creating this dry brush effect under the rocks with that pure black. So wherever there's water under the rocks, just taking that and you're dragging it downwards, load in black, wipe off with paper towel. This creates a sort of translucent reflection. You can still see the watercolor under that, the color of the water under that reflection. And you're just full width, dragging that color downwards. For each of your rocks. There's going to be water lines, horizontal water lines painted over that, but let's let that dry before we do anything else to that area. Let's work on the sky. So clouds are optional. A lot of beginner painters find clouds to be tricky. It took me forever to get my cloud style figured out. If you want to skip the clouds, you're welcome to, or if you want to try them out because you've been practicing a lot and you're ready to do these clouds, you can, or if you just want to try them anyway, go ahead and try. But I do a dry brush technique with this so that I can control the amount of white that I have on my brush. And these clouds have brighter white at the top, and then they kind of fade away and have lighter white on the bottom. We're just going to do very simple, sort of light, puffy clouds. So I loaded my bright brush in the white, wiped a little bit off the paper towel, but I want this to start out brighter. So I have like a brighter top to it. And then I wiped my brush off to get a lighter so that it's kind of dry and translucent. And I'm just doing rounded strokes using just the tip of the brush. So wipe the brush off. It's going to create very light, sort of see-through color with your cloud, so it's not super opaque. You don't need a lot of paint on the brush, only a little bit of paint on the brush. Just using the tip of the brush to paint rounded strokes. And then we can go back and at the tops of those clouds, adding a little bit brighter layer of white in there. Creates that sort of puffy look. Then I'm going to create some more clouds up here. These ones, very similar. So starting at the top to define the edge. The only difference here is we have a darker part of the sky to work with. Doing curvy strokes, bringing that down. The trick really is to make sure there's not a lot of paint on the brush. It creates that sort of see-through, translucent effect with the clouds. Then go back with a little bit more white, but not too much, and just go over just the tops of those clouds. That makes the top part of the clouds a little bit brighter. And then bring some puffiness up here There's some few sort of stray light clouds up high. A little bit more brighter white on the brush. I'm going to go back over some of the tops of these again, but not too much. And there's my light puffy clouds in the sky. And we're going to move along and go back to our rocky area. And now that that area is dry, just make sure for that it is dry, specifically the water area, not the rock. The rock can still be wet, but the dry brush part that we did, that should be dry. We're gonna do turquoise. I'm gonna water it down slightly so it's kind of thin and I can make these loose strokes with it, and white. Turquoise and white. I want to make a light color. This should be a lighter color than that darker turquoise water area, and it should show up anyway because that dark dry brush layer was there. And just this is the number 4 round brush. I'm doing these very, very thin, loose, horizontal lines, and you can see that really beautiful effect that it creates when you paint that over that dry brush area that we did, the vertical strokes. Now we're doing little horizontal strokes. That really adds to the effect of these rocks in the water. Very simple. You can have a few strokes that are kind of bigger and go kind of wavy, but for the most part it's just horizontal lines in that little lower left region of the water. And then next I'm going to create some darker marks in the water. So I still have that same color on my brush. I did not rinse, and I'm grabbing this Phthalo Green. So if you need to freshen up your Phthalo Green, go ahead and freshen that up. So mix Phthalo Green with turquoise. This is going to darken our turquoise. You can even add a teeny bit of black in there. We want a really kind of dark, sort of murky turquoise color. So that's Phthalo Green, that's turquoise, and that's a very, very tiny bit of black. And when you apply this, this should be darker than that turquoise color that's there. So I'm just doing little kind of horizontal marks of varying sizes. So maybe these are like underwater rocks or darker sort of reflection lines that are going horizontally, but adding a little bit of water into that really helps loosen that. These are just loose, sort of kind of thick, horizontal strokes throughout. I don't want to cover all my pretty light color reflection lines that I created. Just added another color in that area, and we are done with the water rocky area. Maybe a few more strokes up here, and we'll call that done. I am going to transition to the trees next. So we will need our 12 bright brush for this. Let's set our round brush aside for now. We will be using this round brush for the trees, but the first thing we're going to do is the trunk of the tree on the left. And this one is burnt sienna. And you'll need some Mars Black. If you need extra Mars Black on your palette, go ahead and load some Mars Black on there. And then we'll be using our 12 bright brush for this. So let's mix about equal parts burnt sienna and black together. This is going to make a very dark brown color. And we're going to start sketching this tree trunk over here on the left. So this tree trunk, it's a little bit thick at the bottom, and it goes thinner as we work our way up. So we'll start with the full width of the brush, but then we'll turn it on its side so that we can sketch this tree out. So this trunk goes from that rock area all the way to the top of the canvas, and it goes off the edge of the canvas. I'm just using the tip of the brush. You can see how I drew the outer part of that trunk. It's wider at the bottom and thinner at the top. So it's about 1/2 inch to 3/4 inches at the bottom. And then it gets thinner. The edges of that tree, you can kind of wiggle your brush, and that'll make the edges a little bit wavy and not like super straight. It gives the tree trunk a little bit of texture if you do that. Add a teeny bit of water in there, helps get that to kind of flow. And just using the tip of the brush to really define that edge. We're just painting this shape solid brown/black. And it's going up and it gets thinner as it gets to the top. So I'm just slowly building this tree. On the edges, you can kind of wiggle the brush. Made that a little bit thicker, but it still needs to be thinner at the top and thicker at the bottom. I'm going to paint the tree trunk for our pine tree that's over here on the right. So that tree has a thinner trunk, but it also has that thick to thin, and in fact it goes to a point. It's almost like a triangle, a very kind of stretched sort of triangle because it's thin, pointed at the top and white at the bottom. I'm going to use my T-square here to help get this to be not slanted. So you can do the same, or if you don't want to, you don't have to. I'm just going to use this to help guide my line at first, and then I'll remove the T-squares so that I can build on this line. But same brush, using the tip. This tree does not go all the way to the top of the canvas, but it goes well above the mountain peaks. So that top peak was 2 inches above the horizon line. It goes up about another inch, so maybe about 3 inches above the horizon line. Then I'm going to switch to my round brush. This is going to allow me some more control over this trunk because we want the top part of the trunk to be pointed and we want the base to be thicker. So my 12 bright brush is a little too big for this trunk because this tree trunk is much thinner than that tree trunk we just painted on the left. We're just going to kind of gradually add to this. This is still black and brown. Teeny bit of water helps get that to flow. So I'm in Arizona and it's our very, very dry summer months. And so my paint dries a lot faster because of that. We have the AC going and it's dry in the house. So I have to add just little bits of water to my brush to keep that from drying so fast. Sometimes I'll spray my palette with like a fine mist spray bottle so that the paint on the palette stays wet and I can work it much better. I'm just gradually building this. So I want it to be thicker towards the bottom, but this trunk again is not as thick as the one on the left. And it's just kind of hiding in that rocky area. So before this dries all the way, I'm actually going to set my 12 bright brush aside. We're done with that one. But before these trunks dry all the way, I want to add some texture. And even if it did dry all the way, that's fine. We can still work with that. And so titanium white on the palette. Let's mix titanium white with that brown and black color that we have on our palette. So this is going to lighten that color. And on the right side of this tree trunk, we're doing short vertical strokes that go up the tree to create that bark impression. So just on the far right side, we're going to keep the far left side of that trunk dark and shadowy. So you're doing little, and that the paint is right there on the tip of the brush. I'm only using the tip of the brush to create those strokes. Very sort of light, barely letting that brush graze the canvas very lightly little vertical strokes. We kind of want to make the far right part lighter, but keep the far left part darker. So if you want to go in and add darker in there by adding maybe more of that brown and black to your brush at that point. So that just creates that bark texture. But that first layer that we did is very, very dark and shadowy. We want a lot of that dark and shadowy to be showing through still. So this one, we're going to do the little bark texture on the left, bark texture. And kind of the same thing, vertical strokes. This trunk is a lot thinner, so we don't have a lot of space to work with, but we can still create that texture on it. A little bit extra white on the far left adds that pop of brightness in the trunk. As you're mixing these colors and then you load your brush, you can kind of twist the brush. It gets that paint right there on the tip. So we're going to do the branches of this tree, this pine tree, and we're just going to create these very kind of small branches that are sticking out, but they're curving downwards. So every branch starts from the trunk. It's a little bit thicker, and then it quickly, as it goes horizontal, then we branch off and we have these smaller branches that kind of go downwards. So again, it goes horizontal and then it goes out and down. And you don't have to do 3 branches on each of them. You can kind of vary the number of branches. But because these are thin strokes, it really helps when you reload the brush that you're twisting the brush. Gets that paint right there on the tip because we're doing these thin lines. So you really want only that paint right there at the tip of the brush, and you want to use just the tip of the bristles. Branches that all kind of go downwards. And this one too. So on both sides of that tree, we have branches that go down. We can go back in on some of these and add some more branches. Kind of wiggling my hand so the branch itself is a little bit wavy. The end of the branch goes to a point. You can see how that adds more detail into the branches just by adding more little tiny branches. If we want, we can add a little bit of texture to some of these. Maybe the base of some of these branches, we can go back with our white and do little kind of short strokes. This time they're going in the direction of that branch. We don't have to be super realistic about it. I like how that tree looks without the pine needles. It can work as like a fall or winter design. But we will add pine needles after that dries. Let's do this tree on the right. So the tree on the right is going to be a different technique. And we are going to do Phthalo Green and Cadmium Yellow Medium Hue on our palette. So that yellow and green is going to make a really pretty kind of pine color. Let's start by mixing the green and yellow completely together. So equal parts green and yellow. I'm going to use my 12 bright brush for this. This is also the brush I'll be using to paint this pine tree, the one on the right. So yellow and green mixed together to make a really pretty pine green color. I want to start out dark with this tree, so I'm actually going to take some of this green and kind of push it to the side here on my palette. So I have different variations of this green, and I'm going to grab some black to darken this color. A little bit of black on my palette. You only need a teeny bit. And grabbing that black and right here, so that's why I push that to the side, because I don't want to make all that green dark because I'll be using that other green. So we're going to do dark to light layers for this tree. So we have a very dark pine green color. I'm going to start at the top So if you've done fan brush trees before, this is very, very similar, only we're using the bright brush. And we're using the tip, but right here at the top of our tree, those branches are very small because our tree is going to a point. So we really only need to use the corner of the bristles at first. And we're just tapping it to start forming those branches at the very top of the tree. So you're just working your way down using just the tip of the brush, going left and right in like a zigzag formation. As you start going down the tree, your branches are going to be more spread out. And we want this style of tree, our branches are actually going to be kind of perking upwards instead of downwards. So as I'm forming these branches, I'm going to kind of swing my brush curving up and then upwards so I can get those branches to look like they're curving upwards. So we want to leave, so right here we're about in the middle part of the tree. Leave a lot of space between each of these branches. So tapping the brush, curving up. Let's see how I'm leaving space between the branch and the branch above it. Also, as I work my way down, the branches are wider. It's going to give that conical shape to the tree. And let's make this trunk very tall. So I'm not going to add branches all the way down. I'm going to leave a nice gap at the bottom. So that's about 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches of space right there at the bottom. I'm going to leave that open and have no branches there. So this is my dark layer. I'm going to go back and now I'm going to load my brush in that original green that I created. We don't have to wipe the brush off unless your brush is like super overloaded, then you can wipe, and sometimes it just is better just to rinse and start over. This is my second layer and this is a brighter green, so I'm going back in that same sort of pattern. For the most part, I'm just going back over some of my branches, but not trying to cover all of them up. Some areas I might kind of drag my brush downwards like that. So if you kind of drag your brush downward, that creates some more sort of like pine tree stems sticking down. So see how I'm just kind of dragging that downwards. And then I'm going to use my round brush for this. So let's add white into that original green. So now we have a tint of that green. We added white to it. It's lighter color. This is going to show up against our dark because it's lighter. Using my round brush, kind of twisting that brush. So I switched to the round brush because I'm going to add more detail to this tree that bright brush would be too big to do. But I want to kind of emphasize these branch line strokes. A little bit more white to my brush. You might have to add more white depending on how much contrast it has, how dark it is, so it can show up. But I'm just, on these branches down here, I'm just doing these strokes. They're just kind of swooping down from those. I don't want to cover all of my first darker layer. We want that there because that's the shadowy part of the branch. I don't want to lose that part. Stroking downwards. We still have those branches that are curving down and then perking kind of up on the edges. I'm just going back, doing this to all my branches. When I get to the top, it's sort of like abstract and smaller up there, so we don't have to do a lot of detail up there. We can still add that lighter color up there. We want to also make sure that a lot of the tree trunk is still showing, and if we need to go back and add more tree trunk through the branches, we can. I'm going to load more of the yellow onto my palette so I can make more of kind of like a bright yellowish green color. And mix that into your lighter green, so that green with the white, and let's go back and add those pine needle strokes on the bottom edges of all these branches. So this should be showing up as a pretty kind of light yellow green color, but make sure a lot of that dark is still showing at the top. So I'm just stroking down on each of those branches So they're kind of curving, and then on the left, they're kind of going a little bit upwards. And then when we get to the top of the tree, this gets a little bit more abstract and not as defined because it's smaller up there. So we may just stipple the brush a little bit to create some of that lighter color. And I'm going to add white to my brush and go back with another layer, but not a lot. So that white is actually kind of strong in there. So just a few kind of curved strokes in there. Very light, almost dry brush style, but we don't want to cover up our other layers. And then we can do a few more, the lighter color up here at the top. But these are very, very small strokes. So it's just acting as kind of a highlight for these branches. Next, let's rinse our brush off. I'm going to rinse both of these brushes off, set them to the side, and our pine needles on the tree on the left, a little bit easier than what we just did, but same colors. We can start with kind of that medium green, and these ones are just bundles of little diagonal strokes on the tips of all these branches, and these are pointing downwards as well. So using the tip of the brush, I'm just doing little quick little diagonal strokes, making bundles of little pine needles. And we're also going to do this in layers, so we could have started out dark and then went to light, but I'm just going to I started out medium green and then I'll add light and dark into that. Or what you can do is you can load your brush in various amounts of these colors on the palette. So you can grab your very, very dark green and then you can go back and grab your lighter green. These are just nothing but bundles of little pine needles on the tips of all of these branches. So I'm just using the tip of the brush to create this really thin paint strokes. You can remember to kind of twist your brush to make that paint right there, the tip of the bristles. So you're just going to keep adding to this so we can have some bundles that they don't all have to be on the tips of the branches. You can have them kind of sticking out on some of the upper ends of the branches, and then go back with some dark. Add dark layers on there, and then we can add lighter layers on there. We can even add a little bit of black into this. So a teeny bit of black on the brush without rinsing, and then go in there. And let's not cover all of them, but just a little bit black shadowy pieces in there. That's going to give you some darker colors in there. Gives the pine needle bunches a little bit more depth. And then let's move along here. At some point we got to decide if we're finished with all these pine needles. I'm also going to be painting some greenery on the rocks, so like little pieces of moss. And we'll still be using our 4-round brush and the same greens on our palette. So with this, if you want to rinse the brush first, you can to get the black off, but it doesn't matter if there's not too much black. We're just going to stipple little moss greenery pieces on the rock. This really adds a pretty layer of green. So we don't want to cover the rocks. We worked really hard on these rocks, so let's try not to paint them solid green. We're just stippling very lightly little clusters of greenery. You can use the green yellow, the medium green, any of the greens that are on your palette from what you've mixed with the pine for making the pine needles. Just stippling mostly in the dark green areas. I didn't want to add too much into the lighter color, the highlight part of the rock. So just in the lower regions of the rocks. You can kind of create that textured look when you do the stippling. So it's like little dots, but then when you add some darker color in there, some variation in that color, that creates that texture as well. We are almost done with this detailed landscape painting. The one final detail I'm going to do is add a little bit of like a little kind of rock that's sort of overlapping the base of that tree there, and then kind of touching up some of these with the white and the white. And I want to add a little pop of extra white on the edge of some of these tree trunks. So with still using the 4 round brush, just very, very lightly adding. We could even mix a little brown in it if it's too bright. A few little strokes. You can even do it up in the middle between the branches of that white, just on the edge of that trunk. A little pop of white brightness. If we went too far, we can always go back and take the brown and go over that. So that one ended up being too bright. A little bit of brown in there. But that is it. This is the conclusion of Lake Tahoe. Really enjoyed painting this one. Thanks for watching, and thanks for painting with me.